Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the legibility of your text. As on the slide right now is the text that you probably wouldn't want for a body paragraph because it is very legible. Some of the principles that we're talking about today are almost none of them are actually shown here. One of them is ascenders and descenders. We're going to talk about it later. Most of the letters, they have parts that go down below the general body of the text, and they have parts that go up above. But not really. It's mostly just one straight up block of text. Mostly just this rectangle thing. Another thing is open spaces within the letters. There's usually a hole in the middle of an E or a G or a B. Here, there's just lines splitting it. That's another no. And basically, all in all, this is a very illegible font. However, it's fine for headlines. So if you want to use fonts like this, try to keep it to a minimum. An important part about text that you probably won't have too much of a problem with, as long as you're picking legible fonts, is healthy stroke and open counters. So here you'll see in photocopied text a lot. Some of the little spaces that are supposed to be inside of the letters end up getting filled in with ink. Or sometimes the strokes, which are what the letters are made up of, the lines, they get a little bit light or faded. And it makes it hard to read even though it's an otherwise fine font to use because the ink got smudged or faded in places. Here is two examples of fonts that we're going to compare the principles of legibility with. One of the things that you look at is X height, so it's the height of the X. That basically shows the midline of where your text is in between these two lines. Usually the higher the X height within a certain boundary, the more legible your font will be. These two fonts have basically similar X heights, but if you can imagine one where the X height was down here and all the letters were really taller than it, that would make it a little less legible. Another thing you look at is the apertures. See how open this C is compared to this one? And all the open spaces in the middle of letters in this font are kind of not very big. They're all closed off. This one has a lot more open space in between the strokes, and it makes it a lot more legible. If you see down here, you would be much more comfortable reading this if you had to read a large amount of it. Another thing to look at is the ascenders and descenders in the font. So it's the stuff that basically goes above or below the X height. Both of these fonts have ascenders and descenders that are better than the one that you saw on the opening slide. But as you see this one, it looks a little bit more pronounced than this one over here. And usually that makes it so it's more legible. Obviously, if you went beyond a certain extent, you had like huge curling descenders and ascenders, it wouldn't be quite as nice to read, but as it is. And lastly, you look at serif and sans serif. Mostly you're taught that serif fonts make it easier to read because see these little caps and foots on your letters, the little flat things. People say that that makes it easier to draw your eye straight across the line of text. However, I kind of think that sometimes it makes it harder to read to have all those little things there. Just depends on what you're doing, I guess. So just what you prefer and what ends up looking nicer on your page. So make sure you take those things into consideration when you're choosing a font to set your type in.